Hello and welcome to FP Live. I'm Ravi Agrawal, Foreign Policy's Editor-in-Chief. In just 2 months in office, US President Donald Trump has roiled relations with key allies. Europe, in particular, has been jolted on several fronts by Trump's threats to invade Greenland, his tariffs, his scolding of Ukrainian President Zelensky in the Oval Office, and of course, Vice President J.D. Vance's now infamous speech in Munich last month, where he also met with the head of Germany's far-right party, the AfD. How should Europe respond? In the past month, there's been a flurry of diplomacy with high-level convenings in places like Paris, London, Brussels. There's been a lot of talk. But what action will Europeans actually take, not only regarding tariffs, but also their defense, their literal sovereignty? In a moment, I will speak with two former foreign ministers representing two European countries that are members of NATO. I emphasize former here because I know they are truly able to be forthright and frank. If this is your first time on FP Live, welcome. Here's the deal. These are usually half-hour conversations with experts and policymakers. We will take some subscriber questions throughout, so if you want to join in, just hit the subscribe button, use the code FP Live for a great first-time discount. We are also a podcast, which I urge you to follow wherever you get your audio. So, how should European leaders handle the future of a war on their continent? And beyond the struggle for peace, how do they navigate a new White House that is statedly America first? I have two very special guests. Arancha González was the foreign minister of Spain between 2020 and 2021, overlapping in part with Trump's first term. She's had top roles at the World Trade Organization, notably, and is today the Dean of Sciences Po in Paris. And Gabrielius Landsbergis was the foreign minister of Lithuania from 2020 to 2024. He is also a former member of the European Parliament. Welcome to you both. So I vividly remember chatting with you both in person immediately after that J.D. Vance speech I mentioned in Munich. And just to recap, this was a speech in which Vance basically hectored Europe for not protecting free speech and democracy without directing any of that criticism towards Russia, let alone the United States itself. So, Gabrielis, I'll start with you. You told me then, if that wasn't a wake-up call for Europe, I don't know what is. It has been a month now. Has Europe woken up?
It has to some extent. We are witnessing change in Europe, that's for sure. Europe is for the first time, probably ever, declaring its preparedness to invest in its own defense, removing the limitations for borrowing for member states, again, when they need money for defense. So the defending of European continent and being able to care about ourselves has become a main narrative in Brussels. But it is a process. And I'm far from optimistic or far from complacent by I would never say that, okay, this is it, we are in a comfortable zone. Again, it's more than a month, and there has been no proposal from EU towards Ukraine. And we have to understand that there is no safe Europe if Ukraine is forced to surrender or is forced to capitulate. So it shows that the tensions within Europe are still not yet resolved, and there's still more work to be done.
Arancha, let me bring you in here. You had a similar line that day in Munich, and I'm going to quote you back. You told me that J.D. Vance has done more for European integration than the American founding fathers. He wants to destroy the EU from within. Those were your words. 1 month on, same question. Do you think Europe is responding the way it needs to?
Well, for sure, Europe has had to take a very tough decision, which is to realize that its future, if it wants to be democratic, if it wants to remain independent, if it wants to continue to be a European Union, has to be taken by itself in its own hands. And this is what the EU has seriously started to do, especially in an area where the EU was not expected to do that, which is security and defense. with, I would quote, the newly elected Chancellor of Germany saying very clearly that the EU can no longer rely on the US as its security and defense ally, and therefore has to take its future in its hands. And that has started clearly on defense and security.
So I want to get to defense, and I guess related to that is Ukraine, but let's start with Ukraine. Gabrielius, Trump and Putin spoke on the phone this week. Trump has also spoken with Zelensky. Reportedly, the White House has said both of them were good calls. How are you approaching the fact that these talks are underway largely without Europe?
Well, it is disturbing because it is European future that is being discussed there. It's not just Ukraine, and this is my main part of concern. Yeah, I mentioned during my previous answer that Europe cannot stop by European Union's border if we talk about our security and defense. The fact that I'm really most concerned about that might come out of of Trump and Putin pact is that what we're hearing, that there is a consideration of allowing or just a notion of recognition of occupation of certain occupied territories in Ukraine and what it will mean for European security. This is something that we have not seen from the Second World War. Basically, it is going back to zones of influence where basically Americans are saying to Russians that you can take as much as you can. And for Putin, it will mean that the doors are open. Basically, it's only his power and ambition would limit his extent as to how far he will be willing to go. By this mere fact, and this I think that has not yet really been taken very deeply by Ukraine by European leaders, that it will definitely not stop in Ukraine. And if Americans are no longer there, that means that it's our duty to stop Russians in Ukraine and do not allow their ambition to go further than that.
Arancha, I guess the question then is how? I mean, first of all, do you agree? Do you trust Putin to not attack again? Assuming not, what steps does Europe need to take?
Well, the first thing I would say is that what we have seen so far is the US negotiating with itself. I haven't seen much of a negotiation elsewhere. We have not seen Russia negotiating. We have seen Russia expressing what it would like this negotiation to be about and what it should result on. And what they are saying is basically that they want to limit severely the ability of Ukraine to be a sovereign, independent, and territorially integral country. So let's start there. It's not as if there is a negotiation. For now, there is not. And I think we have to be very careful not to give the impression that we are in a hurry. I would like the US not to give the impression that the US is in a hurry, because showing today that you're in a hurry is emboldening and strengthening the hand of Russia. So what do we do? I think what we have to do is to strengthen the hand of Ukraine, which is the country that has been invaded. How do you strengthen the hand of Ukraine? Is basically putting Ukraine in a strong position to enter a negotiation, not concede before you sit at the table, not weaken the hand of Ukraine, not to diminish the ability of Ukraine to continue to defend itself, because let's face it, the attacks continue. So I think this notion that it has to be peace through strength is, in my view, the way to look at it. Most importantly, if what we're looking for is a long-lasting peace. And we will only achieve a long-lasting peace, and not what we've seen in the past, not what we saw with the Minsk agreements, which wasn't about peace. It was just about taking the time to go back and attack.